Hey everybody, it's Romania Black, and I'm cutting this very close. Because yeah, episode 33 just came out on Patreon today. I'm usually ahead of the game on Monster, and I've liked being recording ahead and I feel like I'm ahead of the spoilers, and I just, in the process of getting caught up with everything else, I've somehow have dropped the ball, and I'm like, I need to watch episode 34 now. So I can be somewhat ahead before I look at the comments for episodes 32 and 33. I need to at least get a little bit ahead, y'all, so I can curb the spoilers. But I do have a few comments from episodes 31 and 32 from Patreon that I want to address real quick before we start. But yeah, last episode, things happened. Johann is affected by the book that he read that we think is the monster book, and why, what happened, what's going to go on here. Tenma doesn't seem to know that Johann had collapsed, and he's scouting out a spot to snipe him, and poor Dieter just had to deal with Crazy Town in the form of this kid that had been influenced by Johann. So, what the fudge? Things are going crazy, and they're getting a little bit sinister, more so than usual, and everything's starting to come to a head, and I'm like, ugh. So, but before we start and go, together, I do want to make note of a couple comments. Sunray talked about how they didn't really, and I kind of liked this. I liked Sunray talked about their own experience, and how it does suck that Dieter has moved from place to place, and even Tenma is kind of just stringing him along and leaving him with random people, whether it's Heckle or Reichwein, and Dieter's just not had the chance to have a normal childhood. But, you know, on the same vein too, Dieter has said he doesn't want to stay. He wants to stay with Tenma, and that's it. And so it's so hard to watch Tenma go further and further into the madness and down the rabbit hole and neglect the one kid that believes in him unconditionally and uses what Tenma's taught him to like influence others. So it's like Dieter is a prime example of that goodwill, like paying forward to others, and Tenma's just not able to see it. And so it's really tragic, right? I hate it, but I'm glad Sunray brought that up. And then H-Banana 7, there's a lot of great comments about Gillen, about Rudy taking on Lunge. I really appreciated all those comments. They gave me a good laugh, and I was like right there with y'all. But I liked that H-Banana 7 pointed out that in the subtitles, there's a line said by Gillen that it isn't translated in the subtitles. And I was like, oh, and it's where Rudy asks Lunge if he has a family in episode 31 in the interview. And I was like, ooh. And I love that because it's Rudy trying to get at the heart of, don't you have a family? Don't you have anybody that you can relate to in this situation? And the thing is, Lunge does, but he's completely abandoned them. So it's interesting too. You could also argue that Lunge, like Tenma, has become so obsessed that he's let other things that are more important in life fall to the wayside for this obsession to take form. And it's like, damn. So yeah, y'all, those are my comments, but I know there's going to be a lot of comments to episode 33 and 34, or episodes 32 on YouTube and 33 on Patreon, but I wanted to get this episode out of the way before I tackled them, because I was like, oh my god, I honestly, the stuff happening is crazy, and I couldn't wait, but I was like, I need to watch this episode before I look at comments. So, real quick before we start, I want to give a special shout out over to Patreon to all of the patrons as well as our philanthropy tier. You all are amazing. I want to give a special shout out as per the philanthropy tier requirements to these amazing individuals. Specifically to Edgar, to Anime Annie, to Dana, to Nameless Monster, to Tyrone, to Shimoyama, to Be Happy, who is also a moderator now on the Discord. So thank you, Be Happy, who's helping to keep me spoiler free on Monster. And then to Sunspots, Translucent Men, to Isabel, to Alex Cornejo, and to Truck. Thank you all so, so much. I greatly appreciate it. Your support is so helpful, and all of my love. The intro, the ED changing, things are getting like my stomach churns. Like I start to get really tense and nervous because I know that bad things are going to happen. It's just what craziness is going to occur. And now that there's this weird stuff with Johann going on, I don't know what to expect. I'm like, So yeah, we're not going to waste any more time, y'all. We're just going to dive right in and see what happens in episode 34 of Monster. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's This episode was terrifying on a lot of fronts, but it's so freaking sad too. So I feel like this was definitely like a transition from episodes 33 into 35, whatever 35 entails. I'm just like it just, we need to talk about Tenma going to this hospital with his sniper rifle in tow to find information. And then we talk about Johann, and I feel like Johann snapped. I feel like whatever was in the book has snapped Johann. Now, again, we bring up the whole idea of two Johanns, and I don't want to believe that there are two distinct Johanns, but I don't know, right? I don't know. And I'm not sure, like, Nina seems convinced that there's two Johanns, but we've talked about in the past that that could be a way for Nina to cope with the fact that her brother is a serial killer, is the fact that, oh, well, it's not, totally his fault. He has two personalities. But everything we've seen with Johann has shown he's very complicit in the things that happen, the murders that happen. He is complicit in what goes on. He does not make any effort to stop the murders from happening. He totally lets it go, totally lets it happen. And I think that's a nice juxtaposition and contrast to Tenma, who tries his best to step in and save the life. I think that's this episode sandwiches two very distinct things happening. You have Johann, who sits down, and as the red Hindenburg is about to be destroyed, as old Margot, fake Margot, is about to be murdered, he stands up and leaves the scene and just lets it happen. He knows who's behind that door, right? He's been working with Roberto this entire time. He knows it's Roberto behind the door. He knows that Roberto led her there, right? He knows who the Red Hindenburg is. He knew all along who it was, and he was going there to try to, and the whole thing was, it was just a taunt. He went there to see her, knowing she was going to get killed, knowing that she had nothing on him. He went there just to taunt her. And then he just walks out, is totally complicit, and makes no attempt to save her life. He lets everything just burn. Whereas Tenma, bless his damn heart, even though Tenma knows he's falling into the darkness. That's the problem. And like I've said in the last several episodes, my whole thing about Tenma that is driving me crazy is that Tenma doesn't realize the value of Tenma being alive and not being a murderer. Dieter needs Tenma to not be a murderer, right? Because that's his crux of his whole thing, right? They told the kid in the last episode. But Tenma's like, they'll be fine without me. There's interesting similarities and differences between Johann and Tenma. Both Johann and Tenma believe that the world will be fine without them, right? That's what they both have they both have this impression. Johann believes that he's planted enough seeds that the world will just keep turning without him if something happens. He's just convinced of that. Whereas Tenma believes the world will be fine without him because there's still kindness and good people like the girl doctor in the world that are going to be able to do well. So when she tells Tenma he's in the darkness, he's like, oh, I don't care. That look he gives her is just like, I don't think I'm coming back, but thanks for the offer. It was a very Johann look when Tenma turns around and looks at her. It almost seemed like you could overlay Johann's face and it would look very similar. But Tenma doesn't care if he falls into the darkness because I don't think Tenma thinks he's going to make it past killing Johann. I think at this point, Tenma's main objective is, I'm going to kill Johann, stop the darkness from spreading, and then my work will be done. And if I die after that, if I'm arrested, whatever, I'll accept my fate, and at least I've stopped the darkness from spreading. But the problem is that Johann didn't kill Red Hindenburg. He didn't. Those kids, he didn't push those kids off those ledges. The kids pushed the kids off the ledges. Roberto killed fake Margot. So the problem is that I think Tenma believes that as soon as he takes out Johann, the darkness is going to stop and the problem is going to be solved. But the problem is, as Johann has demonstrated, no doubt Johann has killed people, but as he's demonstrated in this episode, he didn't need to kill her at all. Roberto did it for him. He didn't need to push those kids at all. They did it for him. All he had to do was influence them, and if he leaves, that darkness still spreads without him. That's I think that Johann is very disillusioned to the idea that there's no way he can make the world better. So he's got like this Joker mentality from The Dark Knight where he's like, I'm just going to watch the world burn, and I'm just going to spread the gasoline around and lay some matches down, and maybe people will pick them up and light it for me. And that's what they're doing. So it drives you crazy as a viewer, because you want to shake Tenma and go, it's not just Johann. He has people helping him. He has a network. It's not. And I think Dieter's realizing that there's an influence there. And so it's driving me crazy that I'm like, Tenma, I don't want Tenma to become a murderer, right? Which is so crazy, because at the beginning of the series, when Tenma was first going on his crusade, I was like, okay, he's going to go kill Johann. That's going to be what this series is about Tenma getting to the place where he can kill Johann. We are not halfway through quite this series. We're on episode 34, so we're not quite to the halfway point. But it seems like he's getting very close to killing Johann. And I'm like, at the point, I'm like, I don't want him to kill him anymore, because I don't want him to become a murderer, because that'll break poor Dieter's heart. Like, that'll lose faith in him. And like, come on, man. Like, Nina told you, don't become a murderer. I'm really hoping that Nina stops him. I'm really hoping, since she's in Munich, that she stops him. And she's like, do not do this, please. And then she gives the Rosso example. I'm banking on it. I'm like, please, Tenma, do not kill Johann, because I don't think that's going to solve the problem. But going back to, there's so much happening in these episodes that you're just like, to think about. Going back to Johann, do I think he has a split personality? I don't know, right? I feel like, I've said this with Kroko's basketball of all things, that I'm not really into. I don't like using a mental disorder or a disability as a villainous attribute. It's like one of my least favorite narrative tropes. I don't like it. I think that it's a disservice to people who actually have those disabilities, because it's like, oh no, the villain has a split personality, and somebody with a split personality or DID or something is like, cool, I get to be the villain. Yay. Like it just isn't a good narrative decision. I think that you could do better, right? I think that it's more intriguing when you don't blame it on something like a split personality, and instead that's just how that person is. That's just their personality. That's just, they have a motivation behind it. And I think Johann does have a motivation behind what he's doing. He suffered, and he mentions it to the Red Hindenburg in this episode. He went through a darkness he thought could not get any worse. And then he was shot in the head, and it got worse. So we'll talk about that scene when he confronts her, because that was absolutely terrifying. But I would much rather think of Johann personally as someone who is deeply troubled by the trauma they've gone through as a child and decided, screw it, I'm just going to burn the world down. And that's what I'm going to do. And there's still so many unanswered questions about him, but I would much rather it be that Johann is out trying to change the world based on his experiences from his past, than it be like, oh no, it's evil Johann, not good Johann. Like, I would rather it be that. I feel like that's much more smart. It's a much smarter choice to have it be that than just blame it on a disability. So I don't know, though. I don't know. But I feel like there's still more with Johann we don't know yet to determine fully what is going on with Johann, because the book affected him. We don't talk about the book. We didn't talk about the book at all. Didn't bring it up. Carl's over here like in La La Land, like totally oblivious to the fact that Johann's clearly affected by this. But, I want Lottie to find the book. I want her to figure out the book, because I want her to find the book so badly, because she's one of the main characters. And if she finds the book, she's a researcher. She'll do research into it and figure out where it's from, about the author, what the deal is. And she'll be able to tell us, the audience, some important exposition. That's my hope. But I'm like, if they just made this a big old MacGuffin and we never find out what that book is about, I'm going to be so mad. I'm going to be like, you cannot just drop it now after you gave it so much pretense in the last episode. So we need to go through this episode just in general. I didn't see the need to bring White Kun out, although there are some interesting things to note between Tenma and Johann, oddly enough. So he just collapsed. The doctors think it's stress or anemia. Could be stress. Could very well be stress, like you do. But Lottie came and brought flowers. I feel like Lottie brought flowers for a number of reasons. I feel like, one, she's trying to figure out what's going on with Johann because she's, since she's met Nina, she's a little bit suspect. And I feel like she was going to ask Johann about Nina, which I'm glad she didn't see Johann if that's the case. Because I'm like, girl, Johann does not need to know that Nina is there. He may know she's there already. They're twins, so he probably does know, but you don't need to be telling him these things. So yeah, she did not need to be telling him that. And also, I feel like she might have been doing it to like see if Carl was there or get on Carl's good side because like in episode 32, she was a little bit flustered about that. So I don't know. But then she runs into the librarian who was also bringing flowers. And I don't blame her for bringing flowers because she just witnessed a traumatic event. So she's probably like, I need to go get some flowers to this guy so we can, so he feels better. And though he was looking through a picture book. And the way she describes it, she said he was turning the book like this, the pages like this. And like she imitates it, like she's trying to figure out what it was, like what did he do? And Lottie's like, a picture book? What the hell's going on? So there we go. So yeah, the edge of darkness. I mean, Johann is seeped in the darkness at this point, there's no doubt. But I do feel like Tenma's sinking into the darkness, and I hate it. I'm like, I don't want Tenma to be enveloped in the darkness fully. I want him to be, he's been a beacon of light this entire series, and I'm like, now you're saying that he can't do that? I'm like, ugh, Tenma. So Carl's talking to old Johann, saying, well, there's nothing wrong with your brain or your brain waves. Physically, you're completely healthy. Mentally, I was like, Carl was really like a boy, like Boy Scout mode in this episode. I don't know if anybody else thought that, but I was like, Carl, he was like in Boy Scout mode. Like everything was peachy keen. And I was like, Carl, it's such a contrast to the clear darkness that is surrounding Johann. It's like for us who know what's going on, it is palpable. But for Carl, he's like, well, everything's just sunshine and rainbows, isn't it? Like, he's literally staring there wistfully looking out the window. I'm like, If Johann is not looking at you in the conversation, it is not a good thing. Not at all. So he's like, oh, you must be really stressed, from too much work for you to pass out like that. But Carl's been around him all the time, so he should probably know that Johann is not too stressed out at this moment. They go on leisurely walks to the park every Thursday. Like, everything's fine and hunky-dory. Carl, be more perceptive. If it wasn't that, you must have had quite a shock, or that's just what he said. He's fishing a little bit for information, but Johann's not giving him anything back. He's not biting the bait. He's like, I never knew you had surgical scars on your head. And he's like, Carl is definitely fishing for information there. Maybe that's why he's being so peachy keen. Maybe Carl's trying to find something out. I hadn't thought about it that way until that line there, but he could be fishing for information. Like, he doesn't know a lot about Johann. And at one point, Johann was a suspicious person on their list, him and Lottie's. So he might be just trying to find out info, and maybe he just is genuinely curious. He's like, hey, we don't know much about you. I didn't know you had this. You want to talk about it? And Johann is not biting the bait at all. He is not giving anything towards it. And he's like, oh, well, either way, you should take a break from your work and studies and relax a little bit. Ha ha ha. And he's like, oh, and you got a letter in the hospital. And that's when he gives it to Johann. He's like, a letter? And there's no return address. And the thing about it is Johann, I like Carl says, I don't think it's a letter bomb. I'm like, well, gee. I was like, don't jinx it, Carl. What if it was? That's the thing, too. I feel like that's going to come back as well, because Carl's saying that there's a letter bomb. Like, if Tenma tries to shoot Johann, I feel like the security's going to go crazy about that, and then Carl's going to kind of freak out about it. So that may be foreshadowing or something about it, but that's when Johann reads the letter and starts laughing about it. Because, yeah, he knows exactly. He's like, oh, what's so funny? And he's like, who's it from? And he says, it's from the Red Hindenburg. And Carl's like, what? What is that? What's going on there? Yeah, Johann is laughing because he's like, oh, this old lady thinks that she's got my goat. She thinks that she's got me by the balls. She thinks she knows everything about me. She may, but it's not going to affect anything. So, of course, then we go to, like, the photos of the ladies like in the red light district, right? We go to all the photos and there he is back again. I like that one sign says the Elvis show. That's interesting. And all the entire back alley streets here have such a distinct feel and look. There's a coldness to them. It's such a contrast because they show you those pictures of the nude women and the bright lights and like the casino things all at once, and it feels warm. But when you actually go to the street itself, it's cold and it's in darkness. It's the edge of darkness too. It also ties to this district of town, right? That there's all this seedy underbelly. It's like the worst of the worst. And then there's Johann, who's just like the most handsome man possible, judgingly looking around. I also like how the mangaka draws the prostitutes. He gives them like this foxy eye. I don't know how else to describe it, but he gives them like these sly eyes, like, hey, pretty boy. Like this, the way they look, it's so interesting. They have a distinct candor about them, right? And she's like, are you lost or looking for a good time? And she's like, oh, just come with me. And he kind of leans into her for a while and asks her where the Red Hindenburg is. And she's like, oh. And he's like, it's around this area. And asks for it. And she's like, at your age? So yeah, she's probably like, why would you want to go see that old hag? As soon as she said at your age, I was like, is it gonna be? But I thought Margot was dead. So I was like, who would it be, right? I thought she was already dead, but no. You've got some screwed up tastes. It's down there in the creepiest death alleyway possible. But yeah, I thought Margot was dead at this point. I thought Roberto had already killed her. So I did not realize. That does beg the question, why did Roberto leave her alive up until this point? What was the purpose of keeping her alive? Why do that? Why keep her alive for Johann to just, I guess it's just a plot point. They just kept her alive long enough to give exposition and to have Johann have this really creepy moment. Why else keep her alive when she was clearly a liability? Clearly. Unless Roberto kept her alive to try to pry information from her as long as they needed it. But now they don't need her anymore. Maybe, I guess. This alleyway is disturbing, though, because you see Johann, like, walking into the darkness, and there's the girl asking for drug money. Or she asks specifically for drugs. And he walks on by. And then the one girl's like blowing a little trumpet. Clearly and laughing hysterically. Probably on some drugs. And then there's the woman with the balloons. Like, creepiest imagery in the episode. The woman just at the stairwell holding a thing of balloons. There is no way in hell anybody's walking down the alleyway, and yet there she stands with the balloons or sits on the stairwell, and him getting the balloon when he walks back out. What the fudge? And he asks if she's up there. I do love the ambiance. Like when he walks up the stairs, you can feel the creaking and the paint is like chipped on the walls. It's like very minimal. It looks like if you're going to kill someone, this is the place. I'm like, this is the sketchiest thing I've ever seen. And then there's Margot. With all of her knickknacks and everything. What's interesting is on the outside, it's so sketch. And then you walk in and there's like a mallard and plants and all these vases and stuff. And all the stuff she's bought with Schubert's money. And it's all been moved there. Like, what? And she says, have a seat. I like that you can see through her nails in that drawing. That's really good. Johann looks, what's interesting about it is that Johann, even though he's smiling, his skin is paler and more ashen, and he doesn't look as genuinely happy as he does like around the kids, for example. So the mask that Johann puts on of being this handsome, kind person, it does start to wane, and it definitely wanes when he is for sure not being genuine, and especially with Margot Langer. Or the fake one, rather. And so he says, you used that, and now you're using the name Red Hindenburg. And she said she was Blue Sophie before. And she says, names aren't important. Which it goes back to what Wolf said to Tenma. Wolf said to Tenma that names aren't important. It's just what you're known as. And she kind of even twists the knife a little bit further, saying, well, you know all about that, don't you, Johann Liebert? She's like, that's not your real name either. She twists it right back to him, right? You know all about that, isn't that right? And Johann just doesn't really give her an answer. Johann clearly does not take her seriously at all. And she tries to say that she has somebody that is like her husband is on her side. It's like, how many times has Roberto been married? How many times? How many times has he been fake married to all these hoes? Like, what the fudge, Roberto? And so she tries to make it seem like she's got Johann cornered and she was going to blackmail him with this information that she has. She's like, just don't try anything funny. Like, she basically just tries to use this moment to, like, corner him and say, I have you by the balls. You're going to do what I want. And Johann's like, no. He's like, I'm actually not going to do that. So there's that. But I love the fact that she, like, coughs as she's smoking the cigarette. Like, she starts laughing and then she coughs, showing she's not really in great health anyway. She's not in good health anyway. I swear if Johann later is telling Tenma, well, she was going to die of syphilis anyway, so just made her die a quick, painless death instead of a long, agonizing death from syphilis. Am I right? I'm going to be like, Johann. But her giving this exposition to us, the audience, the thing about it is, I don't think she's wrong in how she's figured everything out. She's like, you wanted to get back at that millionaire Schubert. And she blows the smoke like his direction, and it was pretty impressive. What's interesting is she said to get back at him. I'm like, if it was a revenge plot, what did Schubert do to Johann? Unless we find out that Schubert is connected to Kinderheim. If Schubert was connected to the guys that ran to Kinderheim as he was like an investor or a backer, hell, he could have had the whole place built. We don't know. But I'm like, we don't understand exactly what the deal with Schubert is yet. So, I mean, there are a lot of options. Either Johann is trying to get revenge on Schubert because of his connection to his past somehow, or it's the fact that he knew Schubert had a lot of money and would be easy to take advantage of. Maybe that. Or maybe not. Maybe Margot doesn't know what she's talking about and he's not trying to get revenge at all. But Johann makes the statement that he's no longer interested. She says, I never thought Schubert's real son would show up afterwards. She's like, you had Farin commit suicide and after you were done with him. And it's like, well, yeah, that's what happened. Do we know if that's the case for sure? No, but it's awfully convenient. And she says, it took 2 years for you to put like this in place. Like 2 years ago, the real Margot Langer died. That's an interesting thing too. She was killed by this phantom killer. And it's almost as if Margot is suggesting that Johann was the one that killed her because that would get Carl. That's a really good point. Yeah, Margot is seeming to suggest that Johann had the real Margot Langer killed because that way when Carl came to look for her, if that happened, she wouldn't be there and the information, he could kind of control the information that would get out to her. Maybe, but I'm like, how could Johann have known Carl was coming and then he was going to show up at Munich? How would he have known that? It's weird. But yeah, all the timelines, they really start to rack up. Even the fact that the fake Margot like is able to play her and reap the benefits for it, which again, if Johann knew that was going to be a thing and is just using this woman, then there's like a host of things with that. Like, how did he know? It leaves a lot to the imagination, right? Because this woman knew Margot Langer. She's like, she knew her and had drinks with her. So she knew enough about her. She knew enough about her and her past. And she had Margot tell her everything. She told me about the love affair with Schubert and the son she put up for adoption. So I'm like, did Johann connect with Carl in that instant because he was adopted and he kind of felt sympathy for him? We don't know. And then she got killed. And Johann looks so creepily at her, like he's smiling the whole time, like it's no big deal. The police never thought this plan was going to happen. And Johann's just staring at her. And then Richard, whatever his name is, I felt sorry for him. He committed suicide too. And she asks him, how many people have you killed? And he just stares. He doesn't answer the question. We know he's killed at least one. We know he killed Junkers. We suspect that he killed the 3 doctors in the hospital for Tenma, so that's 4. We suspect he may, but we don't know if he we don't know if he legit had a hand in the couples that were killed, or if he hired people to do it and he is like inadvertently connected to them. That we don't know, right? Oh my God. You can't escape. Are you giving up? And she says, tell me, how much will you give me? Yeah, so she basically lured him there to confront him and say, I'm blackmailing you. I figured out your whole story. I'm like, girl, the last thing you want to do to Johann is tell him that you figured out his story. That's how people die in this series. No. And then he finally, like, he just looks so ashen and pale. Are you listening? And then the moment the camera slowly starts zooming, you're like, oh my God. He says, what do you think true fear is? I mean, it is said to be our most primal instinct. I thought I had been to the darkest place in the universe. Which would be in the Czech Republic during the war, right? And she's like, don't try to change the subject, you creepy kid. But beyond that... And he just stares. Oh my God. His wide-eyed stare at the camera is the creepiest thing in this series so far. I saw even blacker darkness. So, here's the thing. That leads me to believe that the blacker darkness he has seen is death. Like he experienced death until Tenma saved him. And that was the darkness. It's very Game of Thrones. In Game of Thrones, there's a character that dies and he's brought back to life. And when he's brought back to life, they're like, what'd you see in the afterlife? And he's like, nothing. There was nothing there. And they're like, oh, okay. And so that's what it feels like. Like Johann, the true fear is not the darkness you've been in this world. It's the fact that for Johann, he believes there's nothing beyond. That's it. And so that, on the one hand, it makes sense why he doesn't care about what he does. Because he's like, it doesn't matter. He's like, to him, he's like, he doesn't care if he gives the girl money to buy drugs. He's like, whatever, do what you want. It's your life. He takes the balloon. He doesn't care if he kills people because he's like, it's my life. This is what I want to do. I'm going to do what I want. And so that kind of explains a little bit of his actions. But then I'm like, if he's afraid, and maybe he's, he says that Tenma's coming to kill him is what he's been telling all the kids. But I'm like, then leave. Run away. If you really are worried about your life and you're worried about dying and that's the true fear, then leave Munich. Run away. I feel like it would be a lot easier for Johann to erase his steps than it seems, and then Tenma couldn't follow him. So unless he wants Tenma to kill him, but it seems like, is that what he really wants? I don't know, Johann. Explain yourself. And then he just stands up. And she's like, hold it right there. Do you think I just let you leave? And he says, I've stopped. I don't have any interest in Schubert anymore. And I'm like, then what are you going to do? If you have no interest in Schubert, then what are you going to do about Carl? I'm like, I don't know if Johann seems like the type of person that he just uses someone, then discards them and moves on. But why did you build this whole thing up with Schubert to begin with if you weren't going to use it for something? I'm like, I don't understand, Johann, what you're doing. And then he says, it's useless. I'm a non-existent person. So I'm like, what would happen if she shot him? Like, would he still, he says he's non-existent. And in a way, that's kind of been what he's been building himself up to be. He's been erasing every trace of him that he can find to where he doesn't exist anymore. He just becomes like a legend or a myth, right? He doesn't feel like an actual person. But I also wonder if there's like a double meaning there where he's not only literally trying to erase his identity so he can't be discovered or tracked or traced, but I also wonder if he just believes that he's just a shell or a ghost wandering in this world and he doesn't really have a purpose. I don't know. I feel like that could be the case, but the point is he like lets that murder happen. He sees Roberto come up from behind her with the gun. And then she says, Roberto, and then he just leaves the door. And he doesn't look happy when he leaves. He doesn't look happy when he leaves and walks out. But I'm like, Johann, you could have told Roberto not to kill her. But then she probably would have revealed she probably would have revealed you to the police or otherwise, and we can't have that happening, so... What the fudge? What? So yeah, I'm really just like, what is going on? And then he leaves, and he just takes it. He takes the balloon, like, I need to feel better. Let me have a balloon, crazy crack girl. And she just gives him the balloon, and then he gives money to the girl to go buy drugs. Which, I don't feel great about that, because, you know, you're just complicit in her actions. You don't try to get her actual help. You just instead encourage the bad behavior. Mm-hmm. Like, what do we do with Johann? He's fascinating. In this episode, he's terrifying. So yeah, so he just leaves. He's like this dark Robin Hood, right? So my thing was at the hospital where all of the Asian patients are going, so that the Vietnamese girl, like, treats them. It's a really good scene. I like the latter half of this episode because we see two sides of the coin. We see Johann being completely complicit in the murder of a woman for no reason than other to murder her. And then on the flip side of that, we see Tenma doing his best to aid a woman in saving someone's life. So it's like, okay, we see both these things happen. They're like opposites of each other. But my thing was, why did he bring the sniper rifle with him? I guess at this point, either one, he's too afraid to leave it at home because he's afraid somebody's going to steal it and he's paranoid about it. Or two, he was literally on his way to go kill Johann and stopped off at this hospital for a couple hours and then peaced out. I mean, it wasn't that he was going to see Johann, though, because otherwise he would have been more in a hurry or on a time crunch, and he clearly stayed at this hospital for a long time. But, so it has to be the case that he's just paranoid somebody's going to take the sniper rifle and ruin his chance to kill Johann. But it's really obvious when you're walking around. I'm like, those aren't tennis rackets, Tenma! You can kind of tell it's something that's not what you would normally see somebody walking down the street with. And so... And Tenma, what's so sad is that even as Tenma is trying, what's so similar to Johann is that even as Tenma is trying to appear to be happy, to be in good spirits, his face gives away that is absolutely not the case, right? It's showing that he's really, that's not what's happening. He's actually in this pit of despair and darkness, just like Johann, right? Both of them try to put on a happy face, but you can kind of see through it in this situation. And so then he sees the young girl. The fact that she's 17 is insane to me. The fact that she's 17 performing all these surgeries, and then we find out why she's doing it, because they're all illegal immigrants. And if they go to a real hospital, they'll be deported. And that's why she's doing it, so that they can keep living there. That is very admirable, and I love that. But she also, like, works for 48 hours straight and then passes out. And Tim was like, whoa, we need to cool down just a wee bit, right? Just hold on. And then we find out her backstory. And it is, like, the most tragic thing in the world. That she came here with her dad, who was a doctor. And he was killed by a bunch of neo-Nazis. It's the saddest thing. That she's like, we came here, he brought me to East Germany to study with him. And then the walls came down. And that's when the neo-Nazis came and killed him. So it's so fascinating the way they talk about the Berlin Wall coming down and its effects that it's had. It's been like that throughout the entire series. And they've talked about just the effects of it. And what's so fascinating is I'm not the best with European history, surprising no one, my American ass. But I remember being, a kid whenever all this was going on. And I remember, in history class and stuff, we would talk about all of the things that happened, like the reasons why the wall had to come down and the things that it did. And everything in the history books, was painted very sunshine and rainbows and like, oh, the wall came down and all of Germany was united and happy rainbows and, ribbons everywhere. And this series paints a very different portrait of, yes, the wall came down and this country wasn't separated anymore, but it wasn't just a clean and happy, everybody's doing great now, we're all united sort of situation. There was a lot of turmoil, a lot of unrest, and a lot of negative things that happened after the wall came down, and this is just one of them, like a consequence of it. So it's fascinating to see like a different portrayal of that event in history and to see how people were affected differently. And I feel for her where she's like, my father was just killed because of the color of his skin. I mean, it's a relatable thing, right? That I think a lot of viewers can relate to or know people that have had that same argument and they're horrified by it. They've lost a loved one to some violence that was just based on discrimination. And I feel for her. Like, it's so tragic. Like, she's just trying to do her best. And she talks about, like, she went to an orphanage, but she kind of has, like, a Dieter situation, right? She went to an orphanage, but the people took her in only out of civic duty, and she realized she couldn't stay anymore. And so, unlike Dieter, who stayed and endured the abuse, she just left. She was like, no, I'm going to leave. And then took her father's books, read them, and started doing her own practice. It's crazy. And I feel for this girl. Like, we've known her for 10 minutes in this story, and I already feel for her. Right? And she's like, I want to continue on my dad's footsteps. And so, and I like that he, like, Tenma tells her, like, you know, take a break and relax and study. And she's like, if I don't look after the people here, they're going to die. And that's when the kid's mom comes in. Like, clearly this place is a sketchy part of town because, like, all the people there, like, they have all these injuries. Like, this woman, like, the girl didn't even bat an eye being like, oh, her pimp went crazy and shot her. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. You know, it's crazy. It just seems like it's a common practice in this area for this type of thing to happen. And she's just dealing with it the best that she can. But of course, thank God Tenma's there to help her do the surgery. And thank God he's an extremely competent doctor and understands everything that's going on. It's like, oh my God. So yeah, so they have blood apparently to transfuse. They do the surgery and it miraculously works out well. Like, they get lucky. Nothing was damaged. The surgery went fine. The kid and the mom are still there. But the saddest thing about this is that Tenma, he's like standing there telling her about how lucky they were and that the surgery was a success. But even as he's happy, his face looks so downtrodden and sad. And it's like, Tenma. And then he just came to find out about Margot, about the Red Hindenburg. He's like, you were the first person on the prostitute's murder scene. And she's like, this wasn't for... I like that she gets sense of darkness that she describes it. She's like, this wasn't a robbery. It wasn't just revenge. It just felt like a murder. Someone's life was just taken. And the insane thing is that Tenma, he just says Johann. Like, he just knows it's Johann. Like, that's the crazy thing. He instantly thinks it's Johann without even knowing any other details. And on the one hand, we, the audience, know, yeah, it kind of was Johann's fault. Like, Johann didn't try to stop it. He knew it was going to happen. But then on the other vein, it's like, oh, Tenma, you are assuming that Johann killed her when it was Roberto that killed her. And Johann and Tenma, you're kind of, you know, getting a little into that Lunge obsession where you believe it's Johann, so it's got to be Johann. But if Johann told you it was Roberto, would you believe it? It's getting into some dangerous waters, right? Some murky waters indeed. And that's when he says, if you're in the middle of the darkness, you'll be completely enveloped by the darkness. And so right now, Tenma's on the edge of darkness. He's on the edge. He's not in the middle. He's not fully enveloped, but he's on the edge. He's getting closer to it, right? He's like, once you do one bad thing, it's over. And he's like, you need to shine a light on it. And he tells her to be that light. Study hard and you can do it. You can be that light. Become a great doctor. It's just like Tenma, by telling Dieter these things, by telling her these things, by telling these other people these kind words, he thinks that he's going to make them better so that if he's gone, they'll carry on. Him and Johann are doing this exact same thing, right? They're both influencing people in their own ways. Johann is influencing chaos and this sense of supremacy amongst these little kids. But Tenma, meanwhile, is influencing with this idea of being a light source, being someone that brings light into a situation. So it's terrifying, though, right? The similarities of how they're doing things. And what's worse is that everybody can see through it with Tenma. With Johann, it's so secretive, you don't catch it. But with Tenma, she's like, you're the one sinking in the deep darkness. And she asks him to come back and see her. And he just kind of looks at her like, probably not, but yeah. Oh my God, it's just... There's a lot of similarities between Johann and Tenma. Similarities and yet contrast. It's like they're both similar in a lot of the ways that they try to influence people, the ways that they handle situations, that they're both kind of like getting into the sense of despair. Like there's a lot of things that are similar about the two of them, but then at the same time, it's like two sides of the same coin, right? And so then where does Nina fit into that? So I don't know if I'll be able to wait before episode 35. I don't think I can, but I am going to check out some of the comments. I did see today there were comments for episodes 32 and 33. I am going to check those out before I watch episode 35, but oh my God, I want to know about that damn book. And this show is going to make us wait. If they never bring up that book again, we'll be so mad. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it, right? So in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe. Take care. And I look forward to hearing your comments and seeing y'all next week with more Monster. Bye.